Welcome, dear listener, to this quiet corner of forgotten memory. Settle in, let your shoulders soften, your breath slow. Tonight we drift into the shadowed alleys and flickering chambers of a city veiled in fog and secrets. Come closer, and I'll tell you of the most brutal punishments of medieval Venice. And if this kind of slow, shadowed storytelling feels right to you, stay a while. Perhaps even subscribe so you'll find your way back when the night grows quiet again. Let the world outside slip away now. We are already there. The wind had changed over the lagoon. You could feel it in the way the shutters trembled along the narrow calle, in the way the gondolas nudged their moorings like restless sleepers. A pale slice of moon lay stretched across the water, soft and silver, and all along the crumbling edge of the Grand Canal, the shadows deepened under stone lions and worn cornices. It was a city made of hushed corners and drifting mist, where marble bridges curved like ribs over black water, and even the bells of San Marco spoke in whispers after midnight. Somewhere behind thick iron grates a chain shifted, a sound like breath caught on stone. The palazzo beside the canal, tall and narrow, its windows shuttered with peeling green wood, had once belonged to a doge, or perhaps a merchant. Stories disagreed, and Venice preferred it that way. What mattered more was that it had since been given over to the magistrati segreti, the secret magistrates, whose decisions carried no appeal, and whose voices rarely left a record. The building had no sign, no lantern by the door, only the faint impression of a lion's paw above the lintel, as if pressed there in ash. Inside it was always cold. The hall smelled of old wood, wax, and wet limestone. Its ceiling arched high, lost to shadow, and the only light came from a single oil lamp, hung low to mark the threshold where witnesses waited in silence. Dust clung to everything, the creases of unused benches, the velvet cover of a forgotten ledger, the cracked edges of a tiled floor. At the end of the corridor, beyond a narrow set of steps, was a chamber no one named aloud, the room of silence. And it was in this room that they brought him, barefoot, robed, wrists loosely bound in old rope that smelled of seaweed and rust. The guards said nothing as they led him through the passage, only the soft slap of feet on stone and the creak of damp wood under iron shoes. The man, middle-aged, sunburned, a merchant perhaps, kept his eyes low, but his breath betrayed him. It came in sharp bursts, shallow and fast, like the first moments of a storm. One of the guards, older, scarred at the temple, reached forward and gently adjusted the man's blindfold. Not out of cruelty, only to keep things orderly. Order was everything here. And as they reached the room of silence, the great door opened not with a creak, but with a soft click, like the closing of a watch. Inside it was colder still. A single chair, a table, 3 shadows seated behind a screen of reed and gauze. The light did not touch their faces. Only the soft glint of a chain, the edge of a quill lifted in pause. And far above them, almost lost in the rafters, the painted ceiling curved in faded frescoes of St. Mark triumphant, the lion radiant, the city beneath him small and drowning. The man swallowed, and still said nothing. Far away a bell chimed. Once. Then the questions began. The first question was never spoken aloud. It lingered in the stillness like a thin veil, felt rather than heard, as though the walls themselves had exhaled something ancient and expectant. The prisoner, now seated, did not raise his head. He knew better than to look for eyes behind the screen. There were none to meet him. Only breath and the gentle scrape of a quill beginning its passage across parchment. His wrists rested on the table, fingers pale, cracked from salt and sun, twitching slightly as though remembering ropes even after they had been removed. His name had been said, but not in greeting. Just a confirmation, a dry utterance that seemed more meant for the record than the man. Behind him, the door had closed with barely a sound. There would be no more movement, not for hours. The room of silence allowed for no shifts of weight, no sighs, no coughs, only the ritual of inquiry, slow and careful, like the winding of an ancient clock or the weighing of souls. "Is it true?" came the first voice, soft, male, low as a draft slipping under a door, "that you were seen unloading parcels at the fish market well past curfew on the 11th of November? The merchant did not respond. He blinked once. His hands twitched. A pause. Then, in a voice dry with sea wind and resignation, he answered, "I was late returning. My cargo had spoiled." There was no reply. Only the wet scratch of ink and the faint creak of a stool shifting behind the gauze. Far away, wind moaned against the shuttered windows like a mourning dove pressed to stone. Outside, Venice slept beneath its winter fog, canals thick with shadow and breath. Along the fondamenta, a stray dog licked something from a broken pail, tail twitching. Above, shutters hung crooked and still. All the city's movement had withdrawn inward, into rooms and cellars and unlit chapels, where candles burned low and oil lamps sputtered like memories. Back inside, the second voice, a woman's this time, smooth as lacquered wood, colder, spoke. "And the nature of the parcel?" He hesitated. His mouth moved, then stopped. The space between silence and speech stretched so thin it might have snapped. "Paper," he said finally. "2 books. More writing." A pen tapped lightly against glass. "No food, no silver, no documents with the Doge's crest." The merchant's lips parted in protest, but no sound emerged. He shook his head, slowly. "Only the books," he murmured, eyes unfocused, as though watching something unfold on the wall behind them. Another silence. The third voice, quieter still, old perhaps or simply tired, cut the air like silk falling onto stone. "Then why," it asked, "did the parcel sink when dropped in the canal?" The man's face changed, not in fear but in memory. His brow creased. His jaw twitched once, twice, then went still again. "I don't know," he whispered. But he did. They all did. In Venice, parcels were tested. If they floated, they were deemed light, innocent, unburdened. If they sank, they were judged differently, weighted with secrets, or worse, flesh. He looked down. The table was made of wood, old and uneven, its grain twisted in patterns that resembled rivers or veins. He counted the knots. 1, 2, 3, a habit, a comfort. Behind the screen, nothing moved. The magistrates had become part of the room, fixed as statues, silent as carved saints. The oil lamp guttered slightly, throwing new shapes against the floor. Somewhere in the rafters, a spider shifted in its web, disturbed by the faintest tremble in the air. Then came the rustle of parchment folding. The woman's voice again. "We have what we need." A bell, small, brass, impossibly delicate, was rung once. Not for sound, for signal. Moments later, the door opened. 2 guards returned. One had a limp. The other wore a cloak still beaded with rain. Neither looked at the merchant. They took his arms with a practiced touch, neither rough nor kind. He rose slowly. His legs had stiffened from the weight. The air smelled of wax, old paper, and something faintly metallic, like blood forgotten on iron. As he was led from the room of silence, he did not speak. The magistrates remained unseen. The door clicked shut behind them, muffling all sound. Down the corridor his footsteps echoed once more, and in the shadowed space where judgment had been passed, the oil lamp flickered, then settled. And outside, the fog deepened. The corridor through which he was led curved gently, following no logic but that of old foundations and forgotten walls. The stone beneath his feet had been worn smooth by generations of passage. Barefoot, bound, uncertain, shadows clung to the arches overhead, where time had darkened the plaster into a permanent dusk. He did not ask where they were going. The merchant had learned long before tonight that questions in Venice were a form of currency. To spend them unwisely was to invite a deficit far costlier than silence. They turned left, then right, passing a narrow alcove where a statue of St. Nicholas stood with outstretched hands. The face had long since lost its expression, worn down by candle smoke and age. Even the pigeons no longer left offerings there. The guards did not speak. The one with the limp kept time with a steady rhythm. 3 steps, drag, 3 steps, drag. The other walked slightly ahead, his cloak brushing the wall, disturbing dust that shimmered briefly in the torchlight before settling back into place. As they descended a short flight of stairs, the sound of dripping water grew louder. It echoed oddly, folding over itself in the confined space, as though the walls were whispering secrets passed down through stone. At the bottom of the stairs stood another door. It was made of blackened wood reinforced with bands of iron, its surface scarred with countless gouges. There was no handle, only a slot, wide enough for a tray or a voice. One of the guards knocked, once, then again. The door opened inward. Beyond it lay a room that did not feel like part of the city above. Its air was different, thicker, colder, alive in a way that stone should not be. The walls were lined with shelves, each bearing curious items. Lengths of cord, wooden paddles, hourglasses turned on their sides, jars sealed with wax and marked with sigils. A low table stood at the center, covered in linen stained by centuries. Nearby, a basin of water shimmered under the flame of a single lantern suspended from a chain. The light did not reach the corners. The merchant was guided inside. Here the silence was different. It did not wait. It absorbed. From the shadows a figure emerged. He wore no mask, no robe of office. His face was gaunt, his eyes pale but not unkind. In his hands he carried gloves made of lambskin, worn smooth from use. "Sit," the figure said softly, gesturing to a bench beside the basin. The merchant obeyed. He did not shake, not yet. But there was a tightness in his chest, a sensation like air pressing too heavily against his lungs. It was not fear, not exactly. It was the knowledge of process. Venice did not rush its punishments. The man with the gloves knelt and removed the merchant's shoes. Carefully, almost reverently. He inspected the feet for sores, for signs of illness. Then he nodded once to the guards. "You may go," he said. They left without hesitation. When the door closed again, the sound was final. For a moment, the man and the merchant sat in silence. Then the man spoke again. His voice was calm, without cruelty. "You are not to be broken," he said. "Only recorded." He reached for a small book on the table, bound in cracked leather, its pages thick with years. The spine creaked as he opened it, revealing lists, sketches, annotations made in red ink. He did not ask questions. He read from the book. A name, a date, a description of an offense so old it no longer belonged to any one person. He was marking a pattern. "That parcel," the man murmured almost to himself, "was meant for the water." The merchant did not answer. The man did not expect him to. Instead, he took a cloth and dipped it into the basin. The water was cold. He wrung it out and began to clean the merchant's hands, slowly, gently, wiping away the crusted residue of rope, the dust of old wood. He moved with care as though tending a wound already imagined. "There are places in this city," he said, "where memories are kept like wine, bottled, sealed, hidden beneath stone until time makes them sharp again." He lifted one of the merchant's hands and turned it palm up. Lines crossed the skin like dried canals. "You have been marked," he said. The merchant looked away, but the man only smiled faintly and closed the book. "We'll begin again tomorrow." And with that, he rose, leaving the merchant alone in the flickering quiet. Outside, the fog drifted low across the lagoon, whispering against the hulls of sleeping boats. The merchant did not sleep that night. He lay on the wooden bench, knees drawn up, arms tucked beneath his head. The room was dark now. The lantern had been extinguished without ceremony, leaving only the faintest luminescence from the hallway beyond the door's seams. Somewhere above, water moved, distant but constant, as if the canals were breathing. He listened to it, to the rhythm of that breath. It came in slow exhalations, gurgling behind the stone, reminding him that the city he knew, its bridges, its bells, its busy markets, existed on something fluid and unstable. Even here below the palazzo, the tide made itself known. Now and then he heard footsteps passing in the corridor, soft, deliberate, like someone walking across a dream. Sometimes they paused outside his door. Sometimes they continued. He no longer tried to guess which was worse. He counted the sounds, the clicks of distant locks, the low creak of wood adjusting to cold. Once he thought he heard singing, faint, uncertain, a lullaby perhaps, or a prayer. Time unraveled itself. It no longer moved in hours or minutes, but in sensations. The slow cooling of the stone beneath him, the growing stiffness in his spine, the way his throat itched with thirst that would not be named. No one brought food, but he had not expected it. At some point near dawn, he closed his eyes, not in rest, just to shield himself from the vastness of the dark. When he opened them again, the man in gloves had returned. He did not enter with noise or announcement. He was simply there, seated quietly at the table, his hands folded before him, the same leather gloves resting across his lap. He looked at the merchant without speaking, as though waiting for something unspoken to rise between them. Eventually, he nodded once. "We'll begin," he said. There were no instruments, no whips, no chains, only a new candle, lit with a single match, and the same book from before, its cover now stained slightly from the moisture in the air. The man opened it. He did not look down. He spoke without reading. "You traded near the church of San Giovanni e Paolo." The merchant shifted. Barely, just the tightening of a foot. "Yes," he said. "You did so on the feast of Saint Clement." "That was not my intention." The man made a mark on the page. "You were seen speaking with two men from Ragusa. One wore a ring of brass, the other had a limp. They were strangers." "Strangers are remembered," said the man, "when they appear near churches with satchels and no prayer." He turned another page. The candlelight made his profile flicker. Long nose, deep eye sockets, a mouth that looked neither stern nor kind, only quiet, the kind of face built for observing. "What were the books you carried?" The merchant did not answer. The man waited. "They were only for reading," the merchant said finally. "Few read on feast days," the man replied. "Fewer still read books sewn with copper thread." The merchant's eyes moved, slow and cautious, toward the shelves behind the table. On the second row, between a coil of rope and a jar of dried herbs, sat a single copper thread, coiled neatly beside a torn fragment of parchment. He looked away. The man closed the book. "I am not here to accuse," he said softly, "only to know. The city demands records. What it does with them is not for me to decide." He stood. "The tide is rising. By evening the water will lap at the steps of Santa Maria della Salute. That means it is a good day for confessions." The merchant said nothing. The man with the gloves turned toward the door but paused, hand resting on the latch. "There is a room," he said, beneath the stone cistern at Campo Sant'Angelo. It holds no windows, only salt, and the breath of old things. It is for those who remain silent too long. The door opened. Cold air stirred. I will return before sunset. And then he was gone. The merchant sat alone, hands resting palm up on his knees, as the candle guttered once, then regained its shape. The water above whispered again. This time it sounded like a name. The afternoon came in quietly, without the ceremony of bells or changing guards. Time moved not with chimes, but with the deepening tone of the light as it filtered down through the narrow slats above. The stone underfoot grew darker, slick with condensation, as though the prison itself were sweating in its sleep. The merchant sat as he had for hours, still, upright, palms open upon his knees. He had not spoken since morning. He had not asked for water. He had not asked for anything. A soft film of dust had settled on his shoulders, so undisturbed was his form. He looked less like a man and more like an idea of a man, a shape folded into silence. From beyond the door, no voices came, only the constant presence of dripping water and the rare shuffle of feet on the floors above, muted by age and stone. It was nearly evening when the door opened again. But this time it was not the man with the gloves. A boy stood there, perhaps 12, no older, wearing a cloak too large for his frame and boots muddied with canal silt. His hair was dark and uncombed, and his expression unreadable. He carried a cloth-wrapped bundle in his arms, which he placed on the bench without a word. Then he turned to leave. The merchant blinked. "Wait." The boy paused. He looked back over his shoulder, saying nothing. "What day is it?" the merchant asked. The boy shrugged. "St. Lucy's Eve," he said. And then he was gone. St. Lucy's Eve. The shortest light, the longest dark. The merchant reached for the bundle. His fingers moved stiffly, knuckles cracking as they worked the knots loose. Inside he found a basin of clean water, a folded scrap of linen, and a single square of bread, hardened at the edges. He did not eat. Instead, he dipped the cloth into the water and pressed it to his face, then to the creases of his palms. The cold stung, then softened. He let the cloth fall across his lap and stared at the wall, where a faint line of moss traced the base like a seam in a shroud. Above, somewhere beyond the walls, the city was shifting. Boats were docking along the Riva degli Schiavoni. The last deliveries of the day shouted over water. Shopkeepers shuttered their stalls with wooden boards, the slap of iron hinges echoing in the tight streets. Candles flickered behind glass in the chapels, casting halos across empty pews. In the Palazzo Ducale, a fire was being stoked for the night's council, its smoke curling up through ancient flues lined with soot and whispers. And beneath it all, deep in the underlayers, the merchant waited. He tried to remember the sound of the bells from San Zaccaria, the ones that always rang in threes. He imagined their tone. He recalled the pigeons that roosted in the broken colonnade beside the fish market. He pictured the woman with the black veil who sold oil and vinegar from little blue flasks, always arranging them in lines as straight as prayers. He had not seen the sky in 2 days, not truly. Only the memory of it, reflected on water. And then the door opened once more. The man with the gloves had returned, but this time he was not alone. A second figure entered behind him, hooded, robed, face entirely obscured. The cloth hung low, brushing the floor, and the shape beneath it moved with the stillness of ritual. The merchant stood. He was not told to. It simply felt appropriate. The robed figure stepped forward, carrying nothing, saying nothing. They moved around the room slowly, pausing near the table, then the shelf, then finally behind the merchant, where they remained. The man with the gloves gave a nod. "The hour has arrived," he said. Then he crossed the room and pulled a small object from beneath the folds of his coat. It was round, dark, a disk of something that caught the candlelight and held it. He placed it on the table. "This," he said quietly, "is how the city listens." And the disk began to turn. It made no sound. But the merchant felt the air shift, felt something in the stone begin to notice him. And above, as the fog drifted in once more from the sea, the last light of the day vanished from the sky, and Venice prepared for what the night would ask. The disk spun. It did not hum, did not tick, did not glint with anything resembling purpose, but it moved with a slow inevitability, weightless, mechanical, as though the air itself had begun turning a forgotten wheel buried beneath centuries of stone. The merchant watched it. He did not blink. The man with the gloves stood to one side, his gaze lowered not out of reverence but precision. He knew the way of this thing. Its movement marked not time, but memory. Not forward motion, but return. The robed figure remained behind the merchant, utterly still. No breath, no rustle of fabric. Only the suggestion of presence, like a forgotten name recalled without sound. "Do you understand," said the man softly, "what this means?" The merchant shook his head, slow. The man nodded, as if expecting nothing more. "This object," he continued, "was carved from a vault beam salvaged after the fire in San Barnaba. The wood remembers heat, smoke, collapse. It remembers what was said before flames erased it. When it spins, it collects impressions, not words, not gestures, only the shape of intent." He placed his gloved hand gently upon the merchant's shoulder. "Do not speak. Do not defend. Simply let it turn." The merchant closed his eyes, and the disk turned. Outside, the fog had thickened into something more solid than mist. It hugged the lower alleys, drifted beneath the doors of shuttered shops, curled around the ankles of stray dogs and watchmen dozing beneath arches. Bells rang, muffled and low. Not the public chimes, but smaller ones, household tones, private tolls, the kind used to summon servants or mark prayers in the dark. In the room below, the candle flickered once, then again. The disk slowed and stopped. No one moved. Then the robed figure stepped forward. With gloved hands, identical in shade and shape to those worn by the man, they lifted the disk and held it before them, tilting it toward the candlelight. Its surface had changed. Where before it had been smooth, dark, unbroken, it now bore faint ridges, circular, shallow, like the rings of a tree that had grown through silence. The figure turned to the merchant. "You were followed." The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It came not from the throat, but somewhere lower, as though the stone itself had chosen to speak. The merchant opened his mouth, but the man with the gloves raised one finger, not to silence him, to remind him of what he already knew. The disk would speak for him now. The robed figure placed the object on the table and withdrew a slender instrument from the folds of their robe, a thin stylus of bone, smoothed to a point. With it they traced the ridges on the disk, one circle at a time. As the tip moved, the candle bent in its flame, as if the air itself were listening. "You passed through Campo San Polo," the voice said. "You paused near the well. 3 children watched you. One dropped a piece of bread." The merchant's eyes widened. He remembered, not clearly, but enough. "You crossed the bridge of the barefoot friars. A man leaned over the rail. You did not see him, but he saw you." The stylus moved again. "In your pocket, something wrapped in linen. You touched it 5 times between your steps from Calle dei Botteri to the edge of the Campo della Bragora." The merchant's fingers twitched unconsciously, as if remembering the weight. "It was not a book." The man with the gloves stepped forward. He did not look at the disk, only at the merchant. "There is still time," he said, "to shift the shape of your silence." The candle burned lower, its wick curled inward, blackening. The disk rested now, still and mute. And for the first time the merchant spoke, not in defense nor protest, but with the soft clarity of someone who had run out of hiding places. "I did not know it would sink." No one replied. The room answered only with stillness, and the long exhale of something older than justice, waiting to be remembered. The silence that followed was not judgment. It was something deeper, something less human. It spread across the room like mist over a sleeping canal, slow, absorbing, inevitable. The merchant's words hovered in the air a moment longer, then dissolved, as if drawn into the very stone. The disk remained still. The robed figure did not respond. Their hand, still gloved, returned the bone stylus to the fold of their sleeve, and with care they lifted the disk and placed it inside a velvet-lined case. The lid closed with a soft pressure, not a click, not a lock, only the sealing of memory. The merchant remained seated. His body did not shift, but something behind his ribs, something buried and old, began to loosen. It was not relief. It was closer to surrender. The kind of surrender known not in battle, but in winter, when the body no longer fights the cold, but lets it in. The man with the gloves moved to the door. "You will remain here," he said without turning. "Others will come." And then he was gone, his footsteps receding into a corridor now darker than before. The robed figure did not move. They remained beside the table, hands folded, presence quiet but unshifting. The candle leaned. Outside, night thickened. The fog, now heavy as wool, pressed into the city from all sides. Gondolas bobbed unseen beneath the bridges, their moorings pulled taut by the slow tide. Rats skittered beneath carts piled with spoiled cabbages. A dog barked once in the direction of nothing, then lay down, nose on paws, watching the mist settle on the water. Inside the chamber, the air had cooled. Not dramatically, just enough that the merchant wrapped his arms around himself, a gesture unconscious and childlike. He did not know what time it was. The candle was his only measure, and its steady reduction gave him no answers. Only the faint knowledge that something was ending, or beginning. A faint sound drew his attention. Footsteps. But these were not from the corridor. They came from above. Faint. Wooden. Like someone walking on planks long sealed away, followed by the slow moan of shifting beams and the distant creak of something heavy turning in the dark. The robed figure lifted their head just slightly, then returned to stillness. The sound faded, and in its absence the merchant found himself remembering the harbor. He remembered the weight of crates on his shoulders, the way fish oil stained the hems of his garments, the soft rasp of rope as it passed through calloused hands. He remembered the laughter of men playing dice in the warehouse shadows, the whistle of a kettle rising from a brazier outside the baker's. He remembered salt, tar, the taste of copper when he bit into a coin to test its truth. He did not remember the parcel, only the decision to carry it, only the fear of being late. He looked at the floor. A small crack ran from the bench to the wall, fine as a hair, filled with something black and grainy. Dust? Ash? He touched it with one finger. It smeared without resistance. The robed figure finally moved. They stepped toward him with a slow, measured grace, not threatening, not urgent, simply present. They knelt before him and unwrapped a small satchel from within their cloak. From it, they withdrew a strip of black cloth. The merchant did not flinch as it was tied across his eyes. The knot was firm, but not cruel. "You are being prepared," the voice said, soft and even. "For what?" he asked, voice hoarse. The figure did not answer. They guided him to stand. Their hands were gentle, practiced. One palm against his back, one beneath his elbow. Together, they began to walk. Out of the chamber, into the dark. Each footstep echoed, not loudly but clearly, like water droplets falling into a still cistern, one by one, and behind them, the candle finally died. The corridor into which they entered was colder than the room before. Blindfolded, the merchant walked with short, cautious steps. The floor beneath his feet had changed. No longer polished stone, but uneven flagging, damp at the edges. Each step gave a different reply, sometimes hollow, sometimes dense, sometimes a creak, like wood reluctantly holding weight. The robed figure led him without haste. Their pace was soft, uninterrupted, like the rhythm of breath during sleep. They turned once, then again. The air grew thicker. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolled once, low, muffled, as if underwater. The sound rolled across the passage, touched the merchant's skin, and vanished. He tried to count his steps. It became useless. There were no patterns here, only curves, descents, shallow rises. The silence had a pulse of its own, shaped not by footsteps but by the way space narrowed, widened, then narrowed again. His fingers brushed a wall, cold, wet, ridged with something like salt. They paused. The robed figure reached upward and a key turned in a lock. The door that opened did not groan. It sighed. The merchant was guided through. Inside, the sound changed. It was subtle, but he felt it. The air did not echo here. It fell, as though whatever was said or breathed or thought inside these walls did not wish to leave. The stone drank it before it reached the ears of others. His blindfold was removed. The light was faint. Not from a candle or a lamp. It came from high above, filtered through a grate. Moonlight stretched thin through iron slats and shadow. It fell in narrow columns that touched only the center of the room, leaving the corners in silence. He was not alone. 3 others stood there, or rather waited. Each robed, each still. Their garments were dyed in varying shades, deep rust, washed indigo, and something near black. Their faces were visible but featureless in the dimness. Not masked, not hidden, simply without detail, as if the light refused to shape them. The robed figure who had led him here stepped back and folded into the shadows. The merchant was left before the others. He did not know if he should speak. He did not. One of the 3 moved, a woman perhaps. Her robes whispered as she stepped forward, and from within her sleeves, she removed a small object wrapped in silk. She unwrapped it, a mirror, small, oval, its surface mottled and tarnished at the edges. She held it before the merchant. He looked. At first he saw only his reflection, drawn, pale, older than he remembered. Then, as his breath touched the glass, something shifted. A faint shape appeared behind him. He turned. There was no one. He looked again. Another breath. Another flicker. A different shape this time. Narrow. Bent at the spine. Holding something. The mirror was lowered. The woman spoke. Her voice was soft but not kind. "This is the room of shadows," she said. "Here you do not speak your truth. You witness it." The others stepped forward one by one. Each carried a piece of cloth. Each draped it over a hook set into the wall behind the merchant. The cloths hung like ghosts, moving slightly in a breeze that had no source. Then the woman reached for his hands. She turned them palm up. "The lines you carry," she whispered, "are not yours alone." From within her robe she produced a small pouch. She opened it and released a fine powder across his hands, pale, granular, and cold. Salt. He stared at it, then at the lines of his hands. The grains clung to the grooves like snow to footsteps. "You will remain here," she said, "until the salt begins to burn. She turned away. The others followed. The merchant stood alone, beneath the narrow shaft of moonlight, his hands shimmering softly in silence. And far above, through the grate and into the night, Venice slept, its secrets tucked beneath tiles and tides, waiting. He did not know how long he stood. The shaft of moonlight had drifted, its pale geometry no longer falling upon his hands. The salt had dried into the creases of his palms, tightening the skin until it itched. He dared not brush it away. The instruction had been clear. Remain until it burned. And now it did. Not like flame, not like pain. It burned like memory. A low warmth that spread not through skin, but inward, coiling around the nerves into the chest, up behind the eyes. He breathed shallowly. Each inhale made the burn grow. He was alone again. The cloths still hung on the wall, their soft folds unmoving. The figures in robes had vanished, as quietly as they had arrived. There were no more mirrors, no voices. Only the faint suggestion of moisture trickling somewhere behind the stone and the slow ache settling into his spine. He sat. Not because he was told, because standing felt dishonest. In sitting, he returned to something more familiar. His body remembered the crates, the way a back curves when lifting, the pauses between loads, the silences shared between men who labored too long to speak freely. He thought of the old man with the burned hand, Tommaso, who wrapped his knuckles with twine to ease the swelling. Tommaso never asked questions, only nodded once if the work was done, twice if it wasn't. His silences were a language of their own, and now the merchant understood him. The salt had begun to flake. He brushed one grain from the heel of his hand. It fell with no sound. The room offered no clues to its size, only shadow. The ceiling could have been 10 feet above him, or 100. The grate had vanished into the dark. He imagined the moon had passed behind a cloud, or perhaps been swallowed entirely by fog. There was a shift, not sound, not movement, just a difference in air. He looked up. A door had opened somewhere behind him. Its outline glowed faintly with torchlight, like a cut in dark fabric stitched in amber thread. No figure entered, no voice called, but it was open, and he knew to follow. He rose slowly. His joints ached from stillness. The salt left pale prints on his trousers as he moved. He did not look back at the cloths on the wall. They were no longer for him. The corridor beyond the door was narrow, lit by small alcove lamps set into recesses every few feet, their flames trembling inside thick glass domes. The light was not warm. It revealed without comforting. The shadows cast by the flames stretched long and thin, like fingers reaching for something forgotten. As he walked, he began to hear things, soft things, a whisper perhaps, or the drag of paper over stone. A breath caught mid-word, none of it clear, none of it close. But there, beneath the silence, he turned a corner. Ahead stood a new door. This one bore markings, symbols carved directly into the wood, each groove filled with some dark resin that shone like wet ink. The lines did not form letters, not in any tongue he knew. They felt older, made for the hand, not the eye. He reached out. The door opened without pressure. Inside, the room was small, round, with a single chair in the center. On it sat a man, dressed plainly, no robes, no insignia. His head was bowed. The merchant hesitated at the threshold. Then the man lifted his gaze. His face was not remarkable. Thin, bearded, with eyes that might have been blue or gray. It was hard to tell in the wavering light. But there was something else. Something the merchant recognized. Recognition not of person, but of condition. The man had waited. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. The merchant entered. He sat, and the door closed behind him. The chair creaked softly beneath him, not from weight, but memory, as if each person who had ever sat there left behind a trace, slight, inaudible to the world, but woven into the fibers of the wood. The merchant rested his hands on his knees, palms down now, the salt mostly gone, save for a faint residue that shimmered under the lamplight. Across from him, the plain man sat still. He did not speak again. He only watched. His eyes were not unkind, not warm either. They belonged to someone who had spent too long listening, the kind of gaze that no longer judged but recorded. The silence between them grew. It became a fabric, thick with folds. The merchant could feel it gathering around his chest, soft but insistent, like a winter coat worn too long indoors. The room itself offered no relief. Its walls were bare, the stone marked only by age and moisture. No shelves, no table. Just the 2 chairs and a single hanging lantern that swayed faintly, though no air stirred. The man spoke at last, not with inquiry, with observation. "You never asked for your name to be recorded?" The merchant blinked. "No." The man nodded. "It will be nonetheless. The city prefers full accounts." He leaned slightly forward, not to punish, to preserve. The merchant looked away. There was a crack in the wall beside him, small, barely a fracture, yet something about it pulled the eye, like a line in a map leading to a place never named. "I don't believe I matter enough to preserve," the merchant said quietly. The man across from him tilted his head, considering. "Everyone does. That is the city's burden." He withdrew a small notebook from his coat pocket, thin, bound in rough twine. Its cover bore no emblem, only the wear of time. From the same pocket he drew a stub of graphite and balanced it between 2 fingers. "Tell me what you remember about the parcel." The merchant hesitated, then exhaled, slow. It was wrapped in blue linen, old, tied with black cord. "I didn't ask what was inside." "Why not?" "It wasn't my place." The man nodded again without writing. "Who gave it to you?" "A woman." "Describe her." "Red gloves, smelled of cloves. Her eyes were different colors, one dark, one pale." The man finally wrote something, just 1 line. He did not glance down. "Where did she find you?" "Near the bridge at San Moise. She knew my name. She said nothing else, just handed me the parcel and walked away." "Did you follow her?" "I tried." "And?" "She was gone, like fog." The man paused. "Did you open it?" "No." "Why?" "I was told not to." "By whom?" The merchant's mouth closed. A muscle shifted in his jaw. "That," he said, "I won't speak." The man did not press. He only wrote another short line. Then, after a moment, he turned the page. The merchant leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What was in it?" he asked. The man closed the notebook. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you carried it to the water or into the stone." The merchant frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." The lantern flickered once, its light dimming for the space of a breath. Then it steadied. The man stood. He did not gesture, did not explain. He opened the door. A different corridor stretched beyond, narrow, slanted downward, lined with walls the color of coal and silence. Its floor glistened with dampness. "You must walk this part alone." The merchant rose. He did not ask where it led. He stepped through. The door closed behind him with the hush of paper folding, and the darkness ahead welcomed him not as a stranger, but as one expected. The passage narrowed as he walked. Its walls drew in, not abruptly, but with the gradual certainty of a tunnel carved not by tools, but by repetition. The air pressed closer. The ceiling descended. Drops of moisture clung to the stone above and fell in slow rhythm to the flagstones, where they echoed like forgotten footsteps. The merchant moved without urgency. Each step brought a new sensation. The soles of his feet registered textures: worn stone, a patch of something rough like lichen, a puddle chilled by time. His fingertips brushed one wall now and then, for balance more than guidance. The stone was smooth in some places, pitted in others, cold throughout. Light faded behind him. He did not turn. He had long ceased to expect explanations. The air smelled of mineral and mildew, but beneath that, something older, a sweetness, faint as breath on a window. It reminded him of rotting fruit, or the way coins sometimes carried the scent of a hand long gone. The corridor bent and widened. He emerged into a chamber low and circular, where water gathered in a shallow basin at the center. It did not ripple. It did not reflect. It simply lay there, black, dense, still as lacquer. The floor around it sloped gently downward, as if the room had been carved around this pool, not the other way around. On the far side, a bench had been hewn from the wall itself. He sat. The stone was cold, but not unkind, and there he waited. There were no doors, no sound, only the slow awareness of something in the water, not movement, but presence, as though it were not a basin, but a mouth, or an eye. He stared into it, and the water stared back. Then, faintly, the surface shifted, not from above, from within. A shape began to rise, not through disturbance but revelation, as if it had always been there, only waiting for the correct gaze. Slowly the image took form, blurred, pale, tinged with rust. It was a hand, open, empty, suspended just beneath the surface it did not reach, did not beckon. It was not alive. It was not dead. It was simply present, waiting in that space where silence and intention met. The merchant leaned forward. The water did not break. Then he heard it. A voice, not in the chamber, not in his ear, inside him. Not words, precisely, not language, but memory formed into pressure. It asked nothing. It remembered. And the merchant, without knowing how, began to remember with it. He saw himself walking the market alleys in early light, wind carrying the scent of figs and fish. He saw his mother's hand lifting a curtain of reeds to let in the sea air. He saw the way shadows fell across a cobbled floor as his father counted coins into neat rows, muttering their weight beneath his breath. He saw the woman again, red gloves, clove breath. A parcel pressed into his hand, not as transaction but ritual. The hand in the water remained unchanged. But now he understood. It was not his hand. It was the city's. And it held nothing because it had given everything already. The air grew colder. A droplet of water fell from the ceiling and landed upon the back of the merchant's hand. It startled him not because it was wet, but because it felt warm. The image below faded. The basin returned to stillness. He rose, and as he turned to leave, he found the passage behind him open once more, not wider, but brighter. A lantern now burned near the entrance. Its light did not reach him, but it was enough. He stepped toward it, and behind him the pool began to whisper, too soft for words, but loud enough to follow him as he walked. The lantern did not flicker. Its flame stood still inside a dome of thick, yellowed glass, the kind that blurred the shape of things rather than revealing them. As the merchant stepped into its circle, his shadow pooled beneath him like water poured from a height, soft, formless, deep. The corridor ahead no longer pressed in. It opened, not broadly, not with grandeur, but with a quiet grace, like a curtain drawn back in a room already dark. The walls here bore marks, scratches, scores, places where the surface had been scraped clean and scraped again. Not vandalism, not violence, just wear. At intervals, small doors lined the passage, some ajar, some sealed, all unmarked. He did not pause. He knew none of them were his. At the end of the hall, the floor dipped once more, and the scent changed. Smoke, charred wood, melted wax. He descended 5 steps, each one worn smooth at the center. Below, a chamber opened like the belly of a furnace, but without heat. Its ceiling arched low, blackened by age and fire. Iron hoops lined the walls, spaced evenly, like forgotten punctuation. In the center stood a single table. Upon it, 3 objects. A hood of rough cloth sewn closed at the eyes, a pitcher, glazed white, rimmed in rust, and a ledger open to a blank page. The merchant stepped forward. The silence here was heavier than before, not from solemnity, from memory. Everything in the room had heard too much. He did not touch the objects. He simply looked. The hood held the shape of many heads. It sagged in places where others had wept. The pitcher's handle bore the smudge of hundreds of fingers, sweaty, trembling, resigned. And the ledger, thick and worn, had only this one untouched page. Its invitation was quiet, persistent, undeniable. He felt the weight of his hands, felt the way they hovered at his sides, unsure whether they should rise or remain still. Then, without command, a figure entered, through a small unmarked arch behind the table. She was older than the others he'd seen, her hair streaked silver, bound in a cord. She wore no robes, no gloves, just a plain gown the color of bone, and sandals whose soles whispered softly as she walked. She did not look at him. She approached the ledger, lifted a quill from its stand, and dipped it, not in ink, but in the water pooled beneath the pitcher. The quill absorbed the liquid slowly, darkening to a dull stain. She turned the page, and without asking his name, without asking anything at all, she began to write. The script flowed without hesitation, no flourishes, no pause, just line after line, drawn with the patience of one who has written the same truth before. He watched. Though he could not read it from where he stood, he knew what it contained. Not a confession, not an accusation, a record, what had been carried, what had been held too long, what had been passed from hand to hand without question. When she finished, she laid the quill down and placed a small cloth across the page. She pressed it gently, then folded it once, twice, and slid it into a wooden drawer built into the table's edge. Only then did she look up. Her eyes held no judgment, only endurance. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "Why the city remembers everything?" He did not answer. She nodded as if he had. Then she lifted the hood and held it toward him. It did not frighten him. He stepped forward, and as the cloth passed over his eyes, everything else fell away, not with finality, but with the hush of a story pausing between chapters. The cloth closed around his vision. There was no shift in temperature, no scent from the fabric, only the complete absence of light, and with it, a strange calm, the kind that comes not from safety but from removal, like the silence after a bell stops ringing. She tied it slowly. Her fingers brushed his scalp, not with care but with the familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. When she stepped back, the air changed again, lighter, thinner, as though a curtain had been lifted from a forgotten window. And then came the hands, not hers, someone else, not one pair, several, quiet hands, gloved and practiced. They guided him not with force but inevitability, one hand at his back, another at his elbow. A third rested briefly on the side of his neck, a touch so light it might have been imagined. He walked. The floor changed beneath him again, stone at first, then something softer, muffled, as if covered in canvas. His ears attuned to each sound, the hush of robes against walls, the distant knock of something wooden, the low susurration of breath that might have been his own. No one spoke. After a time he could not measure, they stopped. He was turned gently, aligned with precision, and then seated. Not a bench, not a chair, a box. Flat, square, and low. He could feel its sharp corners beneath him. His hands rested on his thighs. His back remained straight, not by discipline, but by necessity. The room demanded it, even if unseen. A new voice spoke, this one male, older, crisp, but not loud. "You are now before the votive tribunal." A pause. "Do not answer." Another pause. "We will speak what must be spoken. You will remember what must be remembered." Footsteps, measured, crossing from one side to another. You carried an object through this city. Its weight was not in metal nor stone, but in what it refused to be named. A turn of direction. You passed under arches built before your birth. You walked bridges layered in the dust of 1,000 names, and beneath the gaze of waterbirds you touched iron that once served a saint. The merchant remained still. The voice continued, now behind him. You did not open it. You did not question it. You let it pass through you as a ghost through a locked door. Then silence. Longer now. He waited. Then, faintly, a breath. Another voice entered. Female this time. "I saw him," she said, softly, from a distance. "He stood by the statue of the angel with one wing." A third voice followed, gravelly and slow. "I marked the way he turned toward the eastern quay. He looked over his shoulder twice." A fourth, younger. "He never blinked." The voices came not from one place, but many, above, behind, near the floor, behind the walls. They did not accuse. They observed. Each voice added a line, a moment, a fragment. And the fragments formed something larger. Not a verdict, a shape. The merchant did not move. He let them speak. He let them build him from the outside in. And when they fell quiet, the silence felt whole. Then the older voice returned. "The object you carried has dissolved. Its contents returned to the archive. Its impression remains." Another pause. Then, "You will forget certain things." A weight in the words now, not a suggestion, a command wrapped in ritual. "You will remember other things differently. You will not return to the same shore twice. You will speak of this only through absence. You will live." The hands returned. They lifted him, unbound the cloth. Light entered. Not bright, not harsh. A glow, amber and gray like a lantern at dusk in a fog-thick square. He blinked once, and in the new room, plain, clean, with a basin of water and folded clothes, he stood alone again. The tribunal had vanished, but the silence lingered. It had changed him, like salt in the pores, like smoke in a stitched hem. He stood in the changing room without instruction. The garments folded before him were simple, wool, soft from many washings, the color of sand after rain. A small tag stitched inside the tunic bore no name, only a symbol. 3 concentric circles stitched in red thread, imperfect, hand-done. He ran a finger over the embroidery, and though he could not say why, it felt familiar. He dressed slowly. Each movement seemed heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from presence. His limbs bore the memory of something unseen, something that had passed through him like a tide through pillars. The cloth settled on his shoulders like a hush. There was no mirror. He did not need one. He washed his hands in the basin. The water was warm, slightly scented. Laurel, perhaps, or dried citrus peel. The salt had left faint abrasions on his skin, lines pale and sore. He let them sting. There were no shoes, only a small curved blade left on the bench beside the basin. Its handle was polished wood, dark with age. Its edge had been honed recently, sharp, precise. He did not touch it. The door opened without sound. A boy stood there, 12, maybe 13, dressed the same, bare feet, calm eyes. He nodded once, then turned. The merchant followed. The corridor beyond was different again, higher ceiling, more light. Long windows lined one side, though they showed no view. Only a wall of soft gray fog pressed close against the panes. It looked like wool stretched thin over glass. They passed no one, but the hallways were warm. A fire had been lit somewhere unseen. He could smell the char, feel its breath along the hem of his tunic. The boy stopped at a wooden gate, waist high, held shut by a simple iron latch. He lifted it, pushed the gate inward, and stepped aside. The merchant crossed alone. He now stood in a courtyard, small, walled, open to the sky, though no sun shone through the mist. The ground was packed dirt, damp and dark. A few stones had been laid to form a narrow path, winding like a question. No plants, no birds. Only a single bench beneath an arch where ivy had once grown. In the center, a figure waited, not robed, not masked. A man in a dark overcoat, collar turned up. He held a walking stick, not for use, but as if it belonged to the moment. His eyes were shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. The merchant approached. The man did not move. Then, without lifting his head, he spoke. "You've been recorded." His voice was ordinary, street-worn, even a little tired. "You've been witnessed." The merchant remained still. "And now you are to be returned." The man turned. He walked to the far wall where a narrow gate stood, barely visible, its hinges rusted green. He unlocked it with a key that looked too thin to hold its shape. The gate opened with a sigh. Beyond, a narrow alley, fog-bound, empty. "You'll go out this way," the man said, still not facing him. "You'll not come back." A pause. "If you do, you won't find this place again." The merchant looked once behind him. No boy, no gate, no courtyard, only fog. He stepped through the passage, and as the gate closed behind him, the sound it made was not final. It was like breath drawn in before a question. The alley embraced him like a corridor of sleep. Stone walls rose close on either side, their surfaces slick with moisture. No lamps, no windows. Only the steady presence of fog, curling in long, lazy ribbons around his ankles, stirring faintly as he moved. He did not know the time. He did not know the day. He only knew the texture of the air against his skin. Cool, tender, uncertain. His feet made no sound. The ground beneath him was uneven, laid with cobbles that had long since slouched under the weight of centuries. Some stones were missing, replaced with packed dirt or drifted leaves, pale and brittle from decay. He did not look back. Somewhere overhead, a bird called once, a low, throaty sound, not of song but of warning or memory. The call echoed down the alley, bounced against the walls, and faded. He paused beneath an archway. The arch bore no carving, only a smear of white chalk hastily drawn, a circle broken at the base. He touched it, then pulled his hand away. The mark was dry, but the wall beneath it pulsed faintly with heat, as if it had recently absorbed breath or light. He continued. The alley widened, and the fog parted slightly, revealing a square he did not know. The buildings around it leaned inward, their windows shuttered, their eaves black with moss. A small fountain sat at the center, dry, choked with leaves. The statue above it had lost its face. Only the outline of a nose and the ghost of a mouth remained. He sat on the lip of the fountain, closed his eyes. For a long while he let the silence exist, not just around him, within. There he found not peace but a kind of hollowing, a gentle emptying out, as though the voice of the tribunal, the woman with the salt, the robed watchers, had passed through him and taken something with them. Not knowledge, not guilt, only shape. He had been reshaped. A sound returned him, not sharp, a scuff, a shuffle. He opened his eyes. An old woman stood at the edge of the square, bent at the waist, wrapped in shawls the color of dust. She held a small bundle of herbs tied with red twine. Her eyes, pale and heavy, found his. She said nothing. She limped forward, stopped beside the fountain, held out the bundle. He took it. It smelled of rosemary and bitter orange. Then she turned and, without speaking, walked toward one of the alleyways and was gone. He looked down at the herbs. The twine was knotted in a pattern he had seen once before, around the parcel he had carried. That black cord, that silent loop. He did not untie it. He did not need to. A wind stirred the leaves. The fog lifted just enough to reveal the edge of a canal beyond the far wall. A narrow boat sat moored there, low in the water, its sides streaked with lichen. No oars, no lantern. Just a piece of cloth draped across the stern. A cloth the same color as the robe of the figure who had first greeted him in the stone room. He stood, walked to the boat, stepped inside. It did not rock. It did not resist. He sat at the center, bundle in hand, and let his eyes fall closed again. The boat did not move, but the water beneath it began to hum, faint, low, like the memory of a bell not yet struck. The boat began to move, not with a push, nor with the pull of current. It moved as if called, drawn along an invisible tether, smooth as breath in a dream. The water parted gently at its bow, creating no ripple, only a soft widening of shadow that followed it like a seam unthreading through the canal. The merchant sat still. His eyes remained closed, but within the darkness things stirred. Not visions, not thoughts. Echoes. The faint scrape of bone against velvet. A candle collapsing in a draftless room. The voice of the tribunal saying, "You will forget certain things." He remembered forgetting. He remembered the moment it began, the precise fold of space within him where something was carefully, delicately unstitched. Not torn, not erased, only softened like parchment rubbed until the ink disappeared into the grain. The fog around the canal had thickened. He opened his eyes. The world was colorless now. No sky, no roofs, no bridges. Only the soft glow of the water below and the pale shimmer of damp stone on either side, leaning inward like confessional booths long abandoned. He looked at the bundle in his lap. The herbs had begun to dry. Tiny flecks fell from the edges as the twine tightened. No wind, yet the fibers shrank. He reached for the knot, but his fingers halted. It was not meant to be opened, not by him, not yet. The canal narrowed. Its walls drew so close he could reach out and touch both sides at once. And then the passage opened again, suddenly, into a quiet basin he did not recognize. No buildings here, just the water, still and circular, enclosed by tall walls covered in ivy that had turned to bone, pale, brittle, rattling faintly in the unseen wind. The boat stopped, not at a dock, at nothing. It floated in the middle, waiting. He looked around. There was no ladder, no exit, no other craft, only the reflection in the water. He leaned over the edge. What he saw was not himself. It was a mask, white, expressionless, floating just beneath the surface like a drowned moon. As he stared, it slowly began to rise, not physically but perceptibly, as though it were moving closer by degrees of understanding, not distance. He reached toward it, and the water did not part. Instead, the surface thickened. His hand met it not with splash or give, but with a hush, as if pressing into silk soaked in smoke. The mask met his palm, cool and dry. It hovered there, then began to change. Its features did not alter, but the feeling of it shifted. Where once it was blank, now it seemed to wait. Not a question, not a demand, a readiness. He lifted it, held it before his face. The reflection disappeared. The fog brightened slightly, revealing faint and far the outline of a tower, round, windowless, rising from the water's edge like a rootless tooth. The merchant placed the mask in his lap. He did not put it on, not yet. The boat turned, not sharply, like a clock hand adjusting its course by a single mark. It moved again. The basin slipped away behind them, the tower receding into blur. And all around, the water whispered things not meant for waking ears. The boat entered a tunnel. No archway marked its beginning. No change in the water's tone announced the shift. One moment the fog thinned, the next it ceased entirely, and above him stretched a ceiling of black stone etched with lines too ancient to decipher. They moved in patterns, spirals, broken circles, teeth like waves. The light dimmed, not into darkness, into velvet. The kind of dim that softened thought, where shadow no longer contrasted, but welcomed. His breath fell into rhythm with the lapping against the hull, and even the echo of that sound grew rounder, dreamlike, as if cushioned by the space itself. The bundle of herbs lay quiet on his knees. Its scent had changed. Less citrus now, more ash. A dry, chalky bitterness that made the air taste of old pages and scorched offerings. He did not move it. He felt no need. It belonged to the stillness. The mask rested beside him, pale in the dim. Its edges shimmered faintly now, as if it had absorbed the color of the fog and translated it into form. When he glanced at it, it seemed to flicker, not physically, but in meaning. Sometimes it looked serene, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes not a mask at all, but a face trying not to be remembered. Ahead, the tunnel opened, not back to the city, to a chamber wide and domed, its walls high and moist with condensation. Light came from a single source, a flame held in a cage of glass, suspended by chains that stretched upward into the dark. The flame did not flicker. It swayed. As the boat approached the center, it slowed, then stopped. He stood, the mask in one hand, the herbs in the other, and stepped onto the platform. It was stone, warm beneath his feet, not from fire but from breath. The whole place felt like it exhaled slowly, once every minute. Not loud, just a shift in pressure, as though the air around him remembered lungs. There was no sound now, not even the water. He walked toward the flame. The cage was old iron, twisted in the shape of vines, thorns, and keys. Inside, the fire burned blue at its core, gold at the tips. Beneath it sat a small basin of copper filled with wax, melted and cooled in uneven layers. Dozens of wicks poked through the surface unlit. He did not touch them. He knelt, set the herbs beside the basin, placed the mask at the edge of the platform, and waited. The air shifted, not from behind, from within. The flame leaned downward, reaching, not wildly, not alive, like a bow, a gesture. One wick caught. A thread of smoke rose, then another and another. The basin bloomed with light, each wick a small voice in a quiet chorus. The scent that followed was not of burning, something else. Rain on warm stone. A hallway closed for years now opened. Letters no longer sealed. The merchant closed his eyes, and for a moment he was not himself. He was the bridge he crossed as a child. He was the bundle handed to him. He was the name he had never given. And then he was still. The flame rose. The platform brightened. And somewhere from behind the walls of that chamber came the sound of doors unlocking. Not loudly, Just once. Just enough. The sound of the unlocking was so soft it might have been imagined. Yet something shifted. The stone beneath him seemed lighter, as though the weight of centuries had been momentarily lifted. The air grew warmer, not with heat, but with memory. The kind that arrives just before waking, when the mind still touches places that do not exist. The flame in the cage steadied. Its tendrils no longer reached or bowed. They stood still, vertical, precise, like the spines of reeds in frozen water. The merchant remained kneeling, not in reverence, in attunement. He was no longer waiting for meaning. He had become its vessel. He rose. The candles in the basin burned quietly, forming a shallow ring of light that pulsed in time with the hush of the chamber. The bundle of herbs was gone, not consumed, not displaced, only unneeded, as though its purpose had folded into the wax. The mask remained. He picked it up. This time he did not hesitate. He lifted it to his face, and with a breath both deep and silent, he let it settle over him. The inside was not dark. It was the color of sea fog at sunrise, and it held no scent, no chill, only a curious weight, like wearing the memory of something once feared and now transformed. He opened his eyes, and the chamber changed. It did not move, but its walls lengthened, its height grew, its edges stretched not outward but inward, toward a center that was not visible but profoundly present. Figures stood now at the edge of the light, draped in garments not of cloth but of dust and threadbare silence. They were not robed in ceremony but in residue, the outlines of former selves or roles long shed. They watched him, not with eyes, with posture, their heads inclined, their arms folded, their presence neither invitation nor rejection. They were there to witness, that was all. He stepped forward. The mask guided him, not by force, not by instruction, but by an inner compass newly formed. He moved toward the far end of the platform where the stone gave way to water again. Not a canal this time, but a narrow inlet, black and still. There was another boat, low, flat, its bow carved into the shape of a sleeping face. He stepped in, and the boat accepted him. No rope, no push. It began to glide forward, tracing a path between the watchers, who remained still as smoke pinned in glass. The tunnel it entered was narrow. The air tasted of lichen and lime. The walls close enough to touch, but he did not reach for them. His hands rested in his lap. The mask softened against his skin as if breathing with him. Time stilled. Space folded, and the silence became complete. Not absence, presence. The presence of every name spoken then forgotten. The presence of every message carried but never opened. The presence of everything the city chose to remember, through him. The boat passed through one final curve, and ahead, in the near dark, a faint outline emerged. A door, not carved, not monumental. Plain wood, a handle of twisted brass, and beyond it, the softest light he had ever seen. He did not yet disembark, but he knew he would. The boat nudged the wooden landing with a sound like breath catching on old fabric. No splash, no creak. Just the hush of arrival, like a page turned slowly in a book no longer read aloud. The merchant stood. His knees ached, not from strain, but from quiet. A stiffness that belonged to stillness too long held. The mask clung gently to his skin, and yet it was weightless now, as if it had emptied itself into him. He stepped onto the landing. The wood was damp, darkened with moss that shimmered faintly in the lanternless light. The air smelled of rain left to gather in stone. Beneath it, something else. Wax, burnt linen, the breath of a window sealed for generations. The door stood before him, ordinary in shape but softened by age. Its surface bore no sigils, no handles polished by ritual, just that twisted brass loop, tarnished to the color of deep riverbed coins. His fingers closed around it. It was warm, not welcoming, just used. He pulled. The door opened not inward, not outward, but away, like mist retreating from shore. And inside, silence again, but layered. Not the silence of absence, the silence of listening. A hall stretched ahead, narrow and low. Its walls were lined with cabinets, drawers, shelves, each filled with things that did not shimmer, did not beckon. Bundles wrapped in cloth, scrolls tied with fraying ribbon, small tokens, some wrapped in parchment, others resting naked in the half-dark. None were labeled, none were arranged, yet each belonged. He walked. The floor beneath him whispered, not creaked, whispered. Each step seemed to murmur its own memory, not his. The wood remembered others. He reached a shelf, paused. There, nestled between two bundles of silk, a spool of black thread, looped tightly, edges worn, as though it had been held in the same hand too many times. He did not touch it, but the thread pulsed faintly in his gaze, as if recognizing something in him that had not yet been named. He continued, past jars sealed with wax, past feathers inked with forgotten scripts, past a child's shoe laced with wire. At the far end, a desk stood beneath a stained glass circle of dim sky. The colors had long since faded, reds gone to rust, blues to ash, but the pattern remained. Interlocking rings, no beginning, no end. A figure sat at the desk. They were not writing, they were waiting. Their face was not hidden, but also not visible. It wore the same mask as he, and in their lap they held a bowl. It was filled with water, still, dark, thick as sleep. Without gesture, the figure raised their hand and beckoned once. No command, only recognition. He stepped forward. Kneeling beside the bowl, he lowered his head until his breath touched its surface. The water stirred, not from him, from within. Shapes formed, not images, not scenes, impressions. The feel of wet stone underfoot, the sound of gloved hands folding parchment, the weight of salt sewn into a hem, the voice that said, "You will remember other things differently." He did not cry, but something loosened at the base of his neck, as though a knot long forgotten had begun to slip. He reached out, placed his fingers in the bowl. The water did not chill, it welcomed. A light behind the mask flickered, not visible, not bright, but steady. He withdrew his hand. The bowl was empty now. The figure at the desk nodded once, and the silence thickened, folding him into its breath. The figure at the desk stood. Their movement made no sound, no stir of cloth or floorboard. They turned, not away, not toward, but aside, as though yielding space to something unseen. The merchant remained kneeling, his fingers drying slowly in the air, their tips tingling with warmth that did not belong to the room. The bowl was still empty, but not void. It now held the trace of having held something true. The desk bore no ink, no pen, no ledger, only a strip of linen, narrow and clean, weighted at the corners by 4 river stones. Upon it, nothing was written. Yet when the merchant looked at it, he felt red, as if every part of him had passed across that cloth in silence and been accepted, not judged. The masked figure stepped aside. A doorway revealed itself. Not in the wall, in the air. A seam opened where none had been. Just past the edge of shadow it widened, revealing a corridor lined not with stone or wood, but something softer. It breathed, not visibly but subtly. The air within it curled like ink in warmed milk. He stood, walked toward it. The mask had changed again, not in shape, in feeling. It no longer sat upon his face. It now seemed part of it, like memory pressed into the grain of bone. He passed through the threshold. The corridor curved gently. Its walls were padded, but not to muffle sound. They were layered in textile, old velvets, woven hemp, scraps of clothing no longer worn. Here, color returned. Faded blues, deep ochres, a strip of striped linen from a market apron, a child's sleeve. The fabric held warmth, scentless, alive. As he walked, his hand brushed the wall, and with each texture a memory surfaced. Not his. Someone kneeling beside a trunk, tying cord. Someone else wrapping a coin in wool. A voice, younger than any he'd known, whispering a name not meant to last. The corridor opened, and the space beyond was round. Not vast, intimate. A dome, half lit from above by a circle of milky glass. No furniture, no icon. Only the walls, covered floor to ceiling in cloth-bound bundles, pinned and stacked like reliquaries. Each one bore a single thread, trailing downward like the tale of a wish never spoken aloud. In the center, a chair. Low, wide, padded in velvet worn to smoothness. He sat, and the room closed its breath around him. A soft vibration hummed beneath his feet. He felt the mask warm slightly at the temples, then cool, and from the wall one thread began to move, not downward, inward, toward him. It trailed across the floor like a line drawn by unseen chalk. It coiled once around his ankle, then rested. No pressure, no bond, just contact. He waited. The thread pulsed, and in that pulse came a sound, not words. A voice nonetheless. Female, aged, gentle but dry, like petals folded in a prayer book. She spoke not to him, but through him. The parcel was carried. The passage was made. And the water did not turn. Each phrase arrived with a rhythm, unhurried, deliberate, like drops falling into a bowl already full. And now it rests. The thread released, slipped back across the floor, coiled itself once more among the others. The room dimmed, not into shadow, but into memory. And the merchant, mask still steady on his face, closed his eyes. He felt not peace, but rightness, as though the silence around him had found its shape. He did not know how long he sat. Time in that space did not pass. It gathered. It coiled like the threads around him, resting in corners, hanging from quiet nails, brushing the edges of thought. He might have sat for minutes or hours, or the length of a single exhale held across lifetimes. The mask no longer pressed against his skin. It floated there, like a presence beside breath. Not a boundary, a witness. He rose. The room made no protest. No thread moved again. No voice returned. Only the faint sound of cloth brushing cloth as he stepped toward the seam through which he'd entered. It was still there, still open, but it no longer led back the same way. The corridor beyond was lighter now, the walls less curved, the textures more familiar, flax, wool, jute, domestic almost. He passed through, and the floor beneath him changed. No longer wood, nor stone, nor woven mat. It was earth. Firm, dry, tamped by footfalls long past. The hallway widened, and he emerged into what could have been a courtyard. But no sky showed overhead. Only a canopy of white linen stretched on cords, trembling faintly as though touched by a wind that did not reach his skin. Around him stood figures. Not many. 3. Perhaps 4. Their faces were masked, but the masks were different, each one shaped like an old tool. A scythe, a key, a spoon. Their robes were undyed. Their hands, uncovered, bore the markings of labor. Thick nails, calloused fingers, skin turned parchment with use. They did not speak. One stepped forward and held out a garment. It was the same he had arrived in, the same dust-hued wool, the hem stained faintly with canal water, folded with care. He took it. Another held a basin, small, brass, still steaming, not for washing. He reached into it without being told. The water tasted of fennel and charred bark. He drank. It warmed the center of him, then cooled his fingers. The figures stepped back, and the curtain at the far edge of the canopy rose, drawn not by hand, but by a slow shifting of breath in the space itself. Beyond, a street, narrow, pale, cobbles softened with moss, windows shuttered. A single bird rested on a windowsill, its wings tucked in. He stepped forward. No one followed. The curtain lowered behind him. He was alone again, but not unaccompanied. Each step carried the weight of what he had forgotten. Each sound, the scrape of boot against stone, the distant sigh of shutters, felt like echoes of things that had not yet happened. He passed a shop. Its sign was blank, yet he knew what it sold. He passed a woman drawing water from a pump. She did not look up, yet she stepped aside as if she had always known his path would cross hers. The street bent gently to the right. He followed, and then the canal returned. Still, wide. No bridge crossed it, only a single pole lamp at the water's edge, its flame enclosed in glass. It flickered once, then steadied. The merchant approached. He did not need to look down. He already knew. The boat was waiting. The boat rocked faintly as he stepped in. Not in welcome, not in protest, only in recognition. The water held it steady, as if the canal itself had drawn a breath and paused. The pole lamp behind him dimmed as he lowered himself onto the central bench, its glow folding into the fog like warmth leaving a room. No oar, no rudder. Yet again the boat began to move. It drifted not forward but backward, as if retracing a thread pulled loose from an old seam. The buildings on either side rose higher now, their facades darker, shuttered, folded into their own sleep. Laundry lines hung slack above, holding garments too soaked with mist to stir. He sat with hands folded, not waiting, just present. The mask remained upon his face, but now it had no edge, no seam. It was not worn, it was worn in, a memory made visible. The canal narrowed, and ahead a tunnel mouth yawned low and wide like a breathless sigh. Carved into its keystone, barely legible, was a single word, retentum, weathered by time, almost claimed by moss, yet still there, still whispering. The boat passed under. Darkness did not fall. It draped, soft, pale like gauze over lamplight. Inside the tunnel, faint lights glowed on either side. No flames, no glass. Only orbs of something suspended in niches, their colors soft as dried lavender, the color of memory caught in linen. The boat turned gently left, then right. No corners, only curves. The sound of the water deepened. It no longer lapped, it echoed. Each note like a distant bell rung in a thick fog, the kind that cannot tell you whether the sound is ahead, behind, or inside. He closed his eyes, and again the impressions came. Not visions, not dreams. The weight of a pouch handed to him in a square filled with the scent of roasting chestnuts. The scrape of a doorway too narrow for the burden he carried. The feeling of rope biting into shoulder, then loosening as the threshold passed. He had brought something here, once, long ago, or only now. The tunnel opened once more, into a chamber without walls, no ceiling, only mist, and floating above the water's surface, lanterns, dozens, each tethered by thin lines that dipped below, disappearing into unseen moorings. Their lights flickered not with wind, but with memory. He did not reach for them, but one descended. It hovered above the bow, its shape unlike the others, more rounded, more worn. A waxed tag hung from its bottom. blank. He stared, and the blankness held meaning. It was not empty. It was unwritten. He understood. The lantern lowered further, came to rest on the bench beside him. He touched it with 2 fingers. The light inside did not flare. It pulsed once, then dimmed. Not out, inward, as if it had folded something away inside itself. The boat moved again. The fog deepened. The chamber fell behind him. And ahead, once more, the outline of the city began to form. But the shapes were wrong, not unfamiliar, just shifted, not as they were, as they had always almost been. The city's contours softened as the boat drifted onward, its path guided by currents unseen. Buildings leaned inwards, their silhouettes blurred by the ever-present mist, as if the structures themselves were whispering secrets to one another. The merchant sat motionless, the mask still affixed to his face, its presence now as natural as his own skin. The canal narrowed, leading into a corridor flanked by towering walls of aged stone. Moss clung to the surfaces, and the air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and forgotten time. Above, narrow slits allowed faint light to filter through, casting elongated patterns that danced upon the water's surface. As the boat glided forward, the merchant's thoughts drifted to moments long past, glimpses of laughter in sunlit markets, the warmth of shared bread, the weight of coins exchanged with trust. Each memory surfaced briefly, then dissolved into the haze, leaving behind a trace of emotion, neither sorrow nor joy, but a quiet acknowledgement of what once was. The passage opened into a circular basin, the water still and dark, reflecting the muted light from above. In the center stood a solitary platform, accessible by a narrow stone bridge. The boat came to rest at the basin's edge, and the merchant stepped onto the bridge, his footsteps echoing softly. Upon reaching the platform, he found a pedestal, atop which lay an object wrapped in linen. He approached, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a small, intricately carved box of dark wood. The carvings depicted scenes of journeys, boats on rivers, travelers on winding paths, stars guiding the way. He opened the box. Inside was a single key, its metal worn but intact, and a slip of parchment bearing a symbol he recognized from dreams he could never fully recall. He took the key, feeling its weight, and sensed it was meant for a door not yet encountered. Returning to the boat, he held the key close, and the vessel began to move once more, leaving the basin behind. The canal widened, the mist thinning slightly, revealing a familiar yet altered landscape. The city's features were more defined now, as if acknowledging his passage and granting him clearer vision. The boat approached a dock he had not seen before, where a figure awaited. A woman draped in garments of muted tones, her face serene. She extended her hand, and he offered the key. She accepted it with a nod, then turned and walked toward a nearby archway, its entrance adorned with symbols matching those on the box. He followed her through the archway into a courtyard bathed in soft light. At its center stood a fountain, its waters flowing gently, producing a melody that resonated with something deep within him. The woman gestured toward the fountain, and he approached, peering into its depths. Within the water, images formed, moments from his life, both significant and mundane. He saw himself as a child, chasing shadows, as a youth, making choices that led him here, as the man he had become, carrying burdens both known and hidden. The reflections shifted, revealing paths not taken, words unspoken, kindnesses withheld or offered. He stepped back, the images fading, leaving only the gentle sound of water. The woman approached, placing a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort, of understanding. She led him to a bench beneath a flowering tree, its blossoms releasing a subtle fragrance that calmed his thoughts. They sat in silence, the city around them breathing in harmony. Time seemed suspended, each moment stretching into the next without urgency. The merchant closed his eyes, the mask now feeling like a part of his very being, and allowed himself to rest, embraced by the quietude of the place. As dusk settled, the woman rose, signaling it was time to continue. He stood, feeling renewed, and together they walked toward a path illuminated by lanterns, each step guided by the soft glow, leading deeper into the heart of the city that had become both familiar and new. The path sloped gently downward. Each lantern swayed not from wind but from memory, long threads of soft golden light drawn between moments half remembered and never spoken aloud. Their glow touched the edges of stone and fabric, of hands and faces long faded, illuminating not the way forward, but the way within. The woman walked slightly ahead, her steps soundless, her robe brushing the flagstones like the hem of a dream. The merchant followed without question. Each movement felt remembered, each turn already taken. Even the air felt rehearsed, the scent of time warming on dusk-heated walls, the hush of footsteps muffled by lichen underfoot. They passed an archway where no gate had ever hung, and the city changed again. The buildings leaned inward with intent now, their angles deliberate, their facades carved not by craftsmen, but by what had passed through them. Windows blinked, then stilled. Shutters held tight. There were no doors, only thresholds marked by offerings, bowls of salt, sprigs of nettle, coins laid in threes. The woman stopped. Before them stood a doorway framed in dark, unpainted wood. No hinges, no handle. Only a circle carved deep at its center, and within the circle, a hollow. He knew without being told what belonged there. From within his robe he drew the carved box, still wrapped in its indigo cloth. He untied it, opened it, removed the key. The metal once dull had warmed in his keeping. It shimmered now, not brightly, not with brilliance, but with purpose. Like moonlight resting on iron long buried, he placed it into the hollow. It did not turn. It sank. The door breathed once and opened. Inside, stillness. Not silence, not emptiness. Stillness. The kind found in rooms where prayers have been spoken and forgotten, but not unanswered. The space was round, cloaked in shadow, lit only by a faint radiance seeping from beneath the floor. Shapes emerged slowly. Benches curved along the walls. Tapestries faded to the color of breath. Vessels closed with wax and linen, their contents humming just beyond knowing. At the center stood a pillar, not tall, just enough to rest the palms upon. Upon it lay a mask, identical to his own, but older. He approached. The woman remained at the doorway, her hands folded, her eyes lowered, not in deference, but in memory. He reached out. His hand hovered, then touched. And in that instant the air around him folded inward, not violently, not even suddenly, but as mist collapses when the sun, unseen, rises behind it. He was no longer in the room. He was the room. He was the curve of its walls, the stitching of its tapestry, the breath of the flame that once warmed its stones. He was each name spoken here, each silence observed. He was the keeper of what had been carried in and never spoken again, and in the center of him, a thread, thin, endless, drawn from mask to mask, from hand to door, from breath to offering. It did not bind, it revealed. He opened his eyes. The pillar remained, the mask upon it unchanged, but the room had lightened, not from flame, from presence. The woman stepped forward, and with her others, figures cloaked in dusk. They came not to see him, but to join him, to remember, to return. He did not move, yet something within him stepped back, not in fear, not in doubt, but in allowance, in release. The figures who entered the chamber did not speak. They did not look upon him. They flowed into the space like wind into fabric, like warmth into hands left idle by sorrow. Their robes bore no insignia. Their movements were not ritual, but each one carried a fragment, an object, a sound, a breath of scent. One bore a candle unlit, its wick curled like a closed eye. Another held a vessel shaped like a folded hand, empty and open. A third, taller than the rest, bore nothing. Their presence was enough. They circled the room without command or cue. They moved in time not with each other but with something older than rhythm. The candle was placed at the base of the pillar, the vessel beside it, and the third figure, still empty-handed, knelt, pressing one palm against the stone, as if listening for a pulse beneath the city's skin. The merchant stood still, mask breathing against his cheeks. He felt, not observed, but accompanied. Then the woman who had led him here turned at last. Her face remained unreadable, and yet he sensed in her the closing of a long-held question. She extended her hand again, not to give, not to take, but to mark a turning. The path had brought him here. What lay beyond would not be walked. It would be remembered. She touched the mask gently. It did not fall. It softened. And as she withdrew her hand, it thinned like mist struck by sunlight. Not vanished. Merged. He touched his face. It was bare, but not alone. The room shifted again. The figures faded, not disappeared, not dissolved. They folded back into the walls, into the tapestries, into the breath of the stone. Only the unlit candle remained, the open vessel, and the echo of a silence too ancient to ever fully end. He looked at his hands. They bore no mark, yet they felt full, with memory, with carrying, with return. The doorway stood behind him now, not ahead, its frame no longer daunting, only open. Outside, the air had changed, not brighter, but freer, as though something had been unfastened above the rooftops. The sky, though unseen, stretched wider. He stepped through the arch. The courtyard was empty. The tree had shed more petals, and the stone fountain had ceased to flow, but it sang still, faintly in the cracks between cobbles. He crossed it without hurry, each footfall deliberate, not in departure, but in arrival. Somewhere a bell sounded, low, single-toned, not summoning, just noting, like a breath drawn, held, then forgotten. He reached the canal once more. The boat was gone. Of course it was. And yet his feet did not seek it. Instead, he walked along the bank, past shutters that no longer turned, past alleys that now stood straight. The mist no longer obscured. It adorned. And in his palm, where nothing lay, a warmth remained, like a coin passed in darkness, like a name spoken and set aside. He continued forward, not to finish, but to carry what could no longer be spoken. The stones beneath his boots were dry now, no longer slick with mist, no longer softened by the breath of the canals. They held their own heat, residual, faint, the kind left by afternoon sun long since set. With each step, the echo of his passage faded more quickly, until there was no sound at all. Only the feeling of movement within stillness. The city watched him, not with eyes, with memory. Shutters that once trembled now stood still. A broom leaned where it always had, against a door that no longer opened. A scarf, forgotten on a sill, stirred faintly as he passed. Not in greeting, not in farewell, but in acknowledgement. The air was changing, not clearing, but lifting, as if each breath now passed through a veil thinner than the last. He turned a corner, and saw a street he had never walked, or perhaps had walked too often to remember. The buildings leaned toward one another, their roofs almost touching, like old friends exchanging words neither could quite recall. A lamp hung low from a wrought iron hook, its glass stained with soot and time. Beneath it sat a chair, empty, worn, waiting. He did not sit, but slowed. A cat crossed his path, silent, unbothered. Its eyes held his gaze for the briefest moment, then passed on, tail brushing the wall. He reached a courtyard, small, enclosed. A single tree stood at its center, leafless but alive. Its branches held not birds but pieces of cloth, knotted, torn, faded. Some bore symbols, others only threadbare silence. Beneath them a shallow basin reflected the sky that was not there. He approached, looked down, and for the first time saw his own face, not fully, not clearly, but enough. The eyes unchanged, the rest softened by time, by wear, by return. He knelt, touched the surface. It did not ripple, but it received. The image deepened, revealing not water but thread, woven tightly, pulling inward, drawing shapes not of body but of presence. His footsteps through fog, the weight of the box, the warmth of a key once held, and then it all unwound. Not undone, just released, as if the memory itself had grown tired and now wished only to rest. He stood, and the courtyard no longer enclosed him. The walls had fallen away, not crumbled, not broken, just receded, revealing a landscape quiet and flat, a field of pale grass under an endless sky. There were no buildings, no streets, only this stretch of land where nothing had happened, but everything remained. He stepped into it. The ground held him gently. The grass did not bend. The horizon did not change. But something opened inside his chest, not a door, not a wound, a window, and from it wind moved through him, carrying something away, something old, something no longer his. He did not look back. There was nothing behind him now but a path made only of having walked. And ahead, a stillness waiting to be entered. The field opened around him like a breath drawn slowly across parchment. Not a place exactly, not a destination, but something softer, like the memory of space. The grass, pale and ankle-high, stirred gently underfoot, though no wind moved. It was not cold. It was not warm. The air here held no season. He walked, no goal, no urgency, only movement. Each step pressed gently into the ground, leaving no mark, no trail. The land did not hold him. It simply allowed him to pass. Far ahead, if distance meant anything now, stood a figure. Small, still, seated on a stool carved from something that might have once been a root, though now it resembled weathered stone, smooth as glass. The figure wore no mask, no robe, just a simple garment the color of ash, bound with a cord. Their head was bent, their hands resting on their knees. Between those hands, resting lightly, was a cloth-wrapped parcel. The merchant approached. He did not call out. There was no need. With each step, the horizon fell away behind him, until the world consisted of three things: the grass, the skyless light, and the seated figure holding something he had already begun to recognize. The parcel. It was the same, and it wasn't. Its cloth bore creases he remembered making. The twine, once taut, now sagged from age. The folds, identical in structure yet changed by the weight of time and touch, seemed to echo the very lines in his hands. He stopped a few paces away. The figure lifted their head. Their face was unreadable, not hidden, simply beyond interpretation, not because it lacked clarity, but because it asked no questions. It was a face that had seen a rival before, many times. They held the parcel forward. He stepped forward and received it. It was warm. He held it against his chest, the way one holds an object both returned and forgiven. The cloth gave slightly beneath his fingers, not soft, but pliant. like something shaped by many hands, never opened, always held. The figure did not rise. They did not vanish. They became part of the air, like color bleeding into fog. He turned, but there was nowhere to turn. The field was the same in every direction, and now he held the center of it. He sat, cross-legged, slowly, cradling the parcel in his lap, and he began to untie it, not carefully, not urgently, but with the calm of someone tracing an old map with their fingers, not to travel, but to remember where things once were. The twine came free, the cloth unfolded. Inside, a mask, carved from something dark, smooth, weightless. No features, no expression. Only form, the suggestion of a face, resting beneath the idea of identity. It gleamed faintly in the lightless air, as if lit by the memory of all it had seen. He lifted it, held it to his chest, then placed it slowly over his own. It fit, perfectly, as though it had always been meant to return. And with that final gesture, the field shifted. The grass folded inward, not trampled, but drawn down by an unseen breath. The sky did not darken, but it became vast, wider than vision, wider than forgetting. And he, no longer just merchant, no longer just bearer, sat with the mask, and the mask sat with him. He did not rise. There was no longer the idea of rising, only the stillness of sitting, the quiet occupation of space once defined by distance and now softened into being. The mask upon his face did not separate him from the world. It placed him within it. It was not a concealment, but a completion. Around him, the field no longer waved. It rested. The grass, once pale and gently shifting, had settled into stillness, as though it too had found its place. The light held steady, diffuse and soft, like linen hanging between day and something quieter. No shadows, no sharpness. He breathed, not to fill his lungs, but to feel the air move through a world that no longer needed direction. His hands lay open upon his knees, palms upward. There was nothing in them now. The parcel had been given. The key returned. The path walked. All that remained was presence. Somewhere within him the boat rocked once more. Not in water, in memory. Its movement was not physical, it was the recollection of passage, the sensation of being carried. And in that moment he realized he had never guided it. The boat had known the way long before he stepped inside. Far above, or perhaps within, a sound rose. Not a bell, not a voice, but something between, like wind brushing hollow reeds, or breath drawn through a fluted chamber. It lasted only a few seconds, but its echo lingered, not in the air, but in the shape of his thoughts, as if the sound had reformed him just slightly, smoothing the edges where his name used to be. He closed his eyes, not to shut the world out, but to hold it closer. Inside the darkness of his eyelids, scenes emerged, not as visions, but as textures. The cool feel of stone steps beneath bare feet, the weight of the mask in his hands, the first time he received it, the scent of damp wool in narrow corridors, the whisper of ash being scattered, none of it linear, none of it held. Each memory passed through him gently, then released, as if they too had tired of being carried. He no longer needed to remember. Everything worth keeping was already within him. Time, too, had stepped aside. It did not end. It no longer applied. There was only this suspended breath, this infinite now, each moment folded gently over the next, like layers of linen wrapping something delicate, not to protect it, but to honor it. He felt the grass shift beneath him, not from motion, from settling. The land received him, slowly, inch by inch, like a blanket pulled upward on a resting body. The air cooled, just slightly, enough to remind him of the shape of his skin. He let his shoulders release. Let his spine curl. Let the weight of his body return to the earth that had always been waiting. The mask remained, but its presence dimmed, as if it had faded into the skin, as if it had never been separate. Somewhere beyond, he sensed the city, still there, still flickering with lanterns and low fog, still holding secrets in shuttered rooms and silent thresholds. But it no longer called to him. He had become the space between its alleys, the breath behind its doors, the echo in its stone. He was no longer one who passed through. He was what remained, what stayed, what held. And in that final understanding he allowed the light, not from sky, not from flame, but from knowing, to rest upon him, soft and absolute. Nothing remained to be done. The field did not end. The light did not shift. There was no final gesture, no sound to signal closure. The stillness simply grew deeper, like layers of silk settling atop one another, soft and absolute. The man no longer waited. There was no longer a need for waiting. He had become part of the place, not absorbed, not erased, but remembered into it. His breath, though steady, had ceased to measure time. His body, though grounded, no longer marked a point between one thing and another. He had become presence. Above him, the sky opened, not as a curtain parts, but as fog dissolves under dawn. No stars, no sun, only the wide, endless color of knowing. Somewhere far off, or perhaps very near, a hand dipped into water. It made no sound, but the ripple moved through the world like a forgotten name recalled, like a kindness returned across years of silence. The field received it without reaction, but within him something answered. Not a word, a breath. And through that breath passed every footstep he had ever taken, every silence he had ever held. The boat, the tribunal, the robed figure, the parcel wrapped and unwrapped, each gesture now threadbare, each symbol lightened by the passage of understanding. He was not watching them, he was not reliving them. He was beneath them, like stone beneath snow. The grass grew taller, or perhaps he sank. Either way, the field met him at his shoulders now. A breeze passed through, not wind, not weather, but remembrance moving gently, bowing the stalks. They brushed his skin like memories too old to bear weight. A sigh moved through the air. It might have been his. It might have been the field's. He lay fully now, arms at his sides. The mask upon his face had cooled, its edges blurred. No longer something worn, something kept. The sky brightened faintly, enough that the grass caught the light and turned silver at its tips. A shimmer moved outward from his body, not flame, not glow, but the soft effect of something returning to where it belonged. It did not rise, it settled. The sound of water returned. Only now he understood. It had always been there. It was not water. It was the city, breathing through stone, speaking through canals, dreaming through silence. He closed his eyes, though they had never truly been open, and the field unchanged held him. No ending marked the moment, only a shift in stillness, as though the world had turned one final page and laid the book gently shut.